In the busy streets of Los Angeles, a billionaire mother thought her wealth could solve everything, except her daughter's broken smile. But one evening, a humble mechanic stepped in, and what happened next would change all their lives forever. Like JD, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Evelyn Carter was a woman who appeared to have it all. From the outside, her life was the picture of success, an expansive mansion in the Hollywood Hills, cars worth more than most people's houses, and a business empire she had inherited and multiplied after her husband's passing. But behind the gates and glass walls, Evelyn carried a loneliness that her fortune could not erase. Her 8-year-old daughter Anna was her entire world, yet life had not been fair to the little girl. Born with mobility challenges, Anna had lived most of her life in a wheelchair, while Evelyn gave her the best doctors, therapists and teachers money could buy. Anna's world was often small and quiet, and Evelyn longed to hear her daughter laugh freely like other children. One late afternoon, Evelyn found herself driving through a quieter part of Los Angeles after an exhausting day. Anna sat quietly in the back seat, gazing out of the tinted window as the city passed by. Evelyn's luxury car, a sleek black sedan worth hundreds of thousands, was usually flawless. But that day, it sputtered to a stop in the middle of a nearly deserted street. She cursed under her breath, frustration rising. It was an unfamiliar area, and though she wasn't helpless, she hated being stranded. Evelyn climbed out, heels clicking against the pavement, and moved quickly to help Anna. She tried to release the wheelchair from the car, but one of the wheels caught and jammed. She tugged and pushed, her polished hands smudging with grease, while people walked past on the sidewalk. What stung most wasn't the inconvenience, it was the way strangers looked at her and Anna, then turned away as though they didn't see. Evelyn was used to polite nods at galas and false smiles in boardrooms, but here, in a simple moment of need, no one cared. Her patience thinned as she pulled harder on the wheelchair, trying not to frighten Anna, who watched her with wide, quiet eyes. Evelyn's expensive jewelry glistened under the streetlights, but it only reminded her how useless wealth felt in moments like this. That was when Jake Miller appeared. He was driving home from a long shift at his small auto shop, his pickup truck rattling slightly with tools in the back. Jake was 30, with grease-stained hands, a worn T-shirt, and a tiredness in his eyes that came from working more hours than he should. Yet beneath the rough exterior, his heart was steady and kind. As he slowed at the sight of the stalled car and a woman struggling, he didn't hesitate. Parking his truck at the curb, he stepped out and walked over, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Evelyn, usually cautious of strangers, looked up sharply. She saw an ordinary man, no tailored suit, no polished shoes, just an honest face and eyes that carried no judgment. Before she could answer, he crouched beside the jammed wheelchair, inspecting the wheel with practiced ease. Anna's eyes followed him curiously, and Jake offered her a gentle smile. "This little thing's just stuck," he murmured, speaking more to Anna than to Evelyn. With careful movements, he adjusted the mechanism, loosened a latch, and freed the wheel. The chair rolled smoothly onto the pavement. Jake looked up at Anna, who had been silent, and gave her a wink. "There you go, sweetheart." Good as new. For a moment, time seemed to pause. Anna's eyes widened, and something in her expression shifted. She hadn't smiled in weeks, not since one of her surgeries had left her in more pain than usual. But now, as Jake steadied the chair and placed it gently before her, a spark lit in her gaze. Her lips curved ever so slightly, and her small hands gripped the armrests with newfound comfort. Evelyn stood frozen. She had spent fortunes on the best care, but none of those specialists had drawn this reaction from her daughter. She swallowed hard, emotions she rarely let surface bubbling to the edge. Jake straightened, brushing the dust from his knees. "You might want to get that car checked out. I can take a look if you want, but for now, you're safe to wait here." His tone was casual, almost dismissive of his own kindness. But Evelyn could barely find words. "Thank you," she whispered finally, her voice softer than she intended. Jake nodded, giving her a polite smile, then turned his attention back to Anna, crouching again to meet her eye level. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" he said warmly. Anna blinked at him, and though no words came out, her eyes seemed to answer. The moment lingered, filled with something Evelyn couldn't name: humility, gratitude, maybe even hope. The quiet street suddenly felt less lonely. For the first time in years, Evelyn realized that help could come from the most unexpected places. She had built walls around her life, thinking she needed no one. But this ordinary mechanic, with his rough hands and gentle voice, had shown her something different. It wasn't pity. It wasn't obligation. It was kindness. As Jake stood to leave, Anna surprised both of them. She reached out a small hand toward him, a gesture so simple yet so profound that Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Jake hesitated, then gently squeezed her hand. "You take care now," he said softly. Anna's smile widened just a little more, and Evelyn thought she saw a glimmer of joy she had almost forgotten existed. Watching Jake walk back to his truck, Evelyn felt a mix of emotions: confusion, gratitude, and an ache in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She had met countless men in suits who tried to impress her with wealth and power, but none had ever made her daughter smile like this stranger just had. In that moment she understood kindness was worth more than all the money in the world. That night, long after the car was towed and Anna was safely tucked into bed, Evelyn couldn't shake the image from her mind: her daughter's spark of happiness, the mechanic's patient smile, and the way the world had briefly felt lighter. She didn't yet know that this small encounter would change her life forever, but deep down, she sensed it was the beginning of something extraordinary. A few days later, Evelyn found herself driving through a quieter neighborhood, a place she had never ventured before. Her sleek car felt oddly out of place among the modest houses and small storefronts, but her heart tugged her forward. Sitting in the back seat, Anna had been the one to insist. The little girl, who often avoided outings, had asked in her gentle voice, "Can we see the man again?" Evelyn was surprised. Her daughter's interest so rare and genuine that she couldn't refuse. Now, pulling up to a small corner garage with a hand-painted sign reading "Miller's Auto Repair," Evelyn felt a flicker of nervousness she hadn't known in years. Jake's garage was nothing like the pristine dealerships Evelyn was used to. The concrete floor bore oil stains, tools hung on worn racks, and the faint hum of a radio played in the background. Yet there was warmth in the clutter, a sense of life and effort that spoke of honest work. Jake looked up from under the hood of an old pickup as the car door opened. He wiped his hands on a rag, and when he saw Anna, his face lit up with an easy smile. "Well, look who it is," he said, crouching down so he could meet her eyes. "Ready for a tour of the shop?" Anna's eyes sparkled and she nodded eagerly. Evelyn, still standing by the car, hesitated. She wasn't used to this kind of setting. Grease and grit weren't part of her world. But as she watched her daughter roll forward, curiosity brimming, she felt her reservations soften. Jake guided Anna inside, pointing out tools and naming them one by one, as though he was showing her treasures. "This here is a wrench, kind of like the superhero of fixing things. And this," he said, lifting a screwdriver, "is what I call the magician's wand." Anna giggled softly, a sound Evelyn hadn't heard in years. Hours seemed to pass like minutes. Jake showed Anna how an engine worked, carefully explaining each part in simple words, turning complicated mechanics into fascinating stories. He even let her hold a few lightweight tools, steadying her hands when they trembled. At one point, he took her wheelchair to a corner of the shop and began tinkering with it. "Nothing wrong with it," he explained, "but I think we can make it a little smoother for you." He adjusted the wheels, tightened the brakes, and added a small lever that made maneuvering easier. When he finished, Anna spun the chair excitedly, her laughter ringing out louder than Evelyn had ever heard. Evelyn stood nearby, her heart swelling in ways she couldn't describe. She had hired countless therapists and specialists, some of the best in the world, but none had ever managed to draw this kind of joy from her daughter. And here was a man with no medical degree, no fancy credentials, giving Anna something priceless with nothing more than patience and kindness. Evelyn found herself watching Jake closely, the way his hands moved with certainty, the way his face softened when he looked at Anna, and the way he treated her not as a patient, but as a child capable of wonder and joy. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Evelyn realized she had barely spoken. She had simply watched, mesmerized by the sight of her daughter coming alive in a way she had almost given up on. At last, Anna wheeled herself over to Jake, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "This is fun," she whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. Evelyn's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. It had been months since Anna had spoken unprompted, and now she was opening up because of him. Jake looked up at Evelyn then, as though sensing her emotion, and gave her a small smile. It wasn't boastful, just gentle acknowledgement. Evelyn felt her defenses crack further. She had spent years surrounded by people who either wanted her money or her influence. But here, in this small garage, she felt something entirely new: gratitude, humility, and a strange sense of peace. The visits became a quiet ritual. At first, Evelyn thought it was only for Anna, but she soon realized she looked forward to them too. After long days in her office, surrounded by cold glass walls and endless meetings, stepping into Jake's garage felt like stepping into a different world. She would lean against the doorway, watching as Jake and Anna laughed together. Sometimes he would teach Anna how to tighten a small bolt or polish a chrome handle. Other times, he would simply tell her stories about the old cars he had worked on. Anna soaked it all in, her eyes shining with a light Evelyn hadn't seen since her husband was alive. Evelyn often found herself lost in thought as she observed. She thought of how different Jake's world was from hers. He didn't live with the weight of billions, the burden of managing empires, or the constant whispers of people seeking advantage. He lived with grease on his hands, music humming from an old radio, and the satisfaction of honest work. And yet, she realized, he seemed richer than anyone she knew, because he carried something money could never buy. One evening, as Anna clutched a small wrench Jake had gifted her, Evelyn finally spoke what had been circling in her heart. "You've done more for her in a week than I've managed in years," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Jake paused, then looked at her with sincerity. All she needed was someone to believe in her. Sometimes that's all any of us need. The simplicity of his words struck her harder than any lecture from a doctor or consultant ever had. As the days turned into weeks, Evelyn noticed changes not only in Anna, but in herself. She laughed more easily, smiled more often, and found herself enjoying conversations with Jake about life beyond money and status. She even started helping in small ways, passing him tools, asking questions, and once even laughing when she accidentally smeared grease on her designer blouse. Jake teased her gently, and for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel like the untouchable billionaire widow. She felt like a woman rediscovering parts of herself she thought were lost. Anna's transformation was undeniable. Her laughter became a regular sound, her words came more freely, and she began sketching pictures of cars and tools, proudly showing them to Jake. Evelyn often tucked those drawings away at night, treasuring them as the signs of hope she had once believed impossible. And though she never said it aloud, she knew deep inside that it was Jake's presence, his patience, his kindness that had unlocked it all. What began as a simple thank you had grown into something extraordinary. For Evelyn, it wasn't just about gratitude anymore. It was about realizing how profoundly one person could change the course of a life, with nothing more than compassion. Each time she left the garage, her heart felt lighter, her daughter's spirit brighter, and her own soul a little more alive. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, Evelyn wasn't afraid to hope. The evening air carried a softness that Los Angeles rarely showed, a kind of calm that blanketed the city in muted gold. Evelyn's mansion stood tall and silent, its sprawling gardens and tall glass windows gleaming under the setting sun. Inside, however, Evelyn felt a nervous energy she hadn't experienced in years. She had invited Jake to dinner, a simple gesture, she told herself, to thank him for everything he had done for Anna. Yet, as she watched her staff prepare the dining room with candles and delicate china, her heart fluttered in a way that reminded her of a much younger, more hopeful version of herself. When Jake arrived, he looked slightly out of place in his clean but modest shirt and jeans. He glanced up at the grand archways and chandeliers with quiet humility, running a hand through his hair as though uncertain if he belonged. Evelyn met him at the door with a smile that was warmer than she had intended, and when Anna squealed and rolled forward to greet him, any hesitation he felt seemed to vanish. The little girl's excitement lit up the vast marble foyer, making the mansion feel less like a palace and more like a home. Dinner was served in the grand dining room, where crystal glasses and polished silver glimmered in the candlelight. Yet despite the opulence, there was no stiffness in the air. Anna chattered happily about the things she had learned at the garage, showing Jake the tiny wrench she carried everywhere now as her treasure. Jake listened with genuine interest, leaning closer and nodding as though her every word was the most important thing in the world. Evelyn sat quietly for a moment, just watching them, her chest tight with a mix of gratitude and something more tender, something she hadn't dared let herself feel in years. Midway through the meal, as laughter spilled easily across the table, Anna suddenly wheeled closer to Jake, wrapping her small arms around him. Evelyn froze, startled as her daughter pressed her cheek against his shoulder and whispered, "You make Mommy smile again." The words, simple and unfiltered, cut straight into Evelyn's soul. She felt her eyes sting with tears, her throat closing as memories of her late husband surfaced, memories of a time when love and laughter had once filled this house. Jake's eyes widened slightly, his hand trembling as he placed it gently over Anna's, his expression soft with emotion he couldn't put into words. Evelyn's tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She turned away, embarrassed, but Jake reached across the table, his rough hand brushing hers. "She's right, you know," he said softly. "You deserve to smile." The words broke whatever dam Evelyn had been holding inside. For so long, she had carried herself with the armor of wealth and control, determined never to show weakness. But here, in front of this humble mechanic and her daughter, she felt the safety to simply be human again. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she let her hand remain in his, her tears speaking louder than anything she could have said. From that evening forward, Jake became more than just a visitor to the mansion. He became part of their lives. He joined them for weekend breakfasts, teaching Anna how to flip pancakes in the kitchen. He repaired the squeaky hinges on Evelyn's garden gates, not because he had to, but because he noticed. He read stories to Anna before bed, his deep voice weaving worlds of imagination that lulled her to sleep. Evelyn watched it all with a heart that grew softer by the day. Slowly, she began to realize something profound. The walls she had built to keep pain out had also kept love away. Jake, without even trying, was breaking those walls down piece by piece. The mansion itself seemed to change with his presence. Rooms once filled with silence now echoed with laughter. The kitchen, once only a place for catered meals, now smelled of bacon and fresh coffee in the mornings. Even the staff, who had long grown accustomed to the stiff formality of Evelyn's routines, began to smile more often, charmed by Jake's easy humor and kindness. It was as though he had breathed new life into the very structure of the home, turning cold luxury into something warm and lived in. Evelyn often found herself marveling at how simple his gestures were, yet how deeply they touched her. One evening, she found him in the garden with Anna, showing her how to plant flowers. Dirt streaked across his jeans, and Anna's hands were covered in soil, but the sight of them laughing together under the fading sunlight made Evelyn's chest ache with a sweetness she hadn't felt in years. She realized then that these small, unpolished moments were what true wealth looked like. Not the billions in her bank account, not the sprawling estate or the luxury cars, but the simple joy of connection. One night, after Anna had gone to bed, Evelyn and Jake sat out on the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder of the world Evelyn once thought defined her. But in that quiet space, all she could feel was the presence of the man beside her. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me," she admitted, her voice low. "But you've given without asking for anything back." Jake looked at her, his gaze steady. "Sometimes giving is enough, especially when it's to people who matter." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning, and Evelyn felt her heart surrender fully in that moment. Over time, what began as gratitude blossomed into something deeper. Evelyn no longer tried to deny it. The way her heart lifted when Jake walked into the room, the way she found herself smiling when she heard his laugh, the way Anna's joy mirrored her own, it all pointed to the truth she had long been afraid to embrace. She was falling in love. And it wasn't the kind of love built on status or appearances, but one grounded in trust, kindness, and shared laughter. Months later, as Evelyn, Jake, and Anna walked together through the gardens, hand in hand, the world seemed transformed. Anna's chair moved smoothly, her giggles filling the evening air as Jake teased her about racing him to the fountain. Evelyn glanced at them both, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had thought her life was destined to remain a hollow shell of wealth and sorrow, but Jake had shown her that real wealth wasn't counted in dollars or diamonds. It was found in people who brought light into the darkest places. Jake hadn't just repaired a broken wheelchair or a stalled car. He had repaired something far more fragile, the hope of a grieving widow and the laughter of a child who had forgotten how to dream. And in return, Evelyn had given him something too, a place to belong, a family to love, and the chance to know that his kindness had reshaped their lives forever. Together, they stood not as billionaire and mechanic, but simply as a family, bound not by circumstance, but by love.